Welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, genuinely and warmly welcome to you. My name's Joanne Avison, and this is a podcast about fascia, movement, and the deeper intelligence of the living body and the living geometry that's sacred and deep to our architecture. There's a lot here for you, and I really would encourage you, when this episode is done, to go back to the beginning of this little series and travel the journey that brought us here to this point. We really have come a long way around this fire, the first of the elements, and we've met 4 of the 5 elements now in their geometric expression. 0, the empty circle, fire, earth, water, each one animating the foundation of the next one that transcends and includes it somehow. And today we meet air. And I want to begin this episode a little differently. Not with a question, not with an image, but with an invitation, which is breathe. Just once. A single conscious breath in and out. And notice what happened there. The inhale arrived, it filled you, it expanded you in all directions simultaneously, as we explored in our last episode, and then it paused for just a fraction of a second at the top. Perfectly poised, neither arriving nor departing. And then the exhale began, unhurried, releasing, returning, until that too paused at the base or the return. That still point between the out-breath and the next in-breath is something of a silent, empty pause of air, the emptiness that isn't empty. That threshold, that suspended moment between one breath and the next, is the element of air. Not the moving air, not the breath in motion, but the poise between the movements, the dynamic equilibrium that makes the next movement possible. That quality of suspension between equal and opposite forces is precisely what the octahedron expresses in geometry. The octahedron is the 4th of our 5 Platonic volumes. It has 8 faces, 6 vertices, 12 edges. Every face, like the tetrahedron and the icosahedron before it, is an equilateral triangle. But this actually unites these 3 Platonic volumes in a very particular way. It distinguishes them from the other 2 of the 5. The octahedron belongs to the triangulated family. And those 3 volumes are those whose faces are all built from the 60-degree angles of the equilateral triangle. That triangulated kinship, as we've been exploring throughout this series, is the geometric foundation of structural integrity in soft matter. It's the foundation of fascia integrity that we introduced in the last episode. It accounts for the air, the water, and the fire, which all need each other to transform and shapeshift as we can. Now place the octahedron in your mind for a moment. 2 square-based pyramids joined at their shared equatorial base, one pointing upward, one pointing downward. 6 vertices, one at the apex above, one at the base below, 4 around the equatorial middle. Here is what is immediately distinctive about this form. It has no obvious base. It balances on a vertex as readily as on a face. Point it in any direction and it finds its equilibrium. There's no dominant orientation, no hierarchy of top and bottom, no single correct way to place it. It is, in the most precise geometric sense, poised. It isn't stable as the cube is stable, nor is it transforming as the tetrahedron transforms. It isn't flowing either in the way the icosahedron flows. The octahedron is poised. It's suspended between equal and opposite forces, ready to move in any direction, committed to none. That's the geometry of air. That's the geometry of the breath that gives us life on this planet. Now there's something worth pausing on because it connects the octahedron directly to the hexahedron that we met 2 episodes ago. The octahedron and the cube are duals of each other, And what that means precisely is this. If you take a cube and place a single point at the exact centre of each of its 6 faces, then connect those points, you generate an octahedron perfectly nested within the cube. The cube has 6 faces and 8 vertices. The octahedron has 8 faces and 6 vertices. The numbers exchange exactly. Earth and air in reciprocal relationship. The ground and the breath. The balancing point that makes the poise possible, and the poise that animates the balance. In the body, that relationship is expressed most directly in the diaphragm, the legs of which, the diaphragmatic crura as they're called, are completely and unmistakably continuous with the psoas muscles. We literally breathe to the earth, the ground beneath our feet, as if the diaphragm itself had its own legs and our legs all in complete continuity. The dome of the diaphragm sits at the centre of the torso, the meeting place of earth and air. The structure that makes breathing possible. In fact, the diaphragm itself is made of the continuing tissue of the pericardium that wraps the heart and spirals under it and opens out into the folded architecture of the diaphragm itself. It gently descends on the inhale, creating the pressure differential that draws air in, and it ascends on the exhale, releasing it. It's always moving between its resting point, neither fully inflated nor fully deflated, but rather it's always suspended between descent and ascent, always in that octahedral poise of dynamic equilibrium. It's not too much to say that the diaphragm is one of the most octahedral structures in the human body in a way of seeing it that's more symbolic than standard, not because it looks like an octahedron literally, but because it expresses in living tissue exactly the principle the octahedron embodies: dynamic instability made audible and palpable from the inside. Now, I want to take you somewhere that most people don't expect geometry to go. We've talked throughout this series about the relationships between the 5 Platonic volumes. The tetrahedron nested inside the cube and the octahedron as duals, the icosahedron approaching the sphere at high frequency. These are not like decorative coincidences, they're actually expressions of the deep coherence of nature's structural code. It's inclusive, and that code in and of itself is our form, elaborated to express us individually as unique architectures within our species-specific design. And within it, the octahedron contains something extraordinary. When you take 2 tetrahedra, think 2 pyramids, one pointing upward and one pointing downward, twist them relative to each other and allow them to interpenetrate, each one passing through the centre of the other, you create what's called the star tetrahedron. In Latin, that's called the stella octangula. Kepler named it that, and the name is precise. It is an octahedron with each of its 8 faces extended outward into a triangular point, spiked into a star. In 2 dimensions, the projection of that form is 2 interlacing equilateral triangles, a 6-pointed star. You will know it well. It's sometimes called the Star of David or Solomon's Seal. And these are not different things with different names. They're the same geometric design held in different traditions, each one carrying its own layer of meaning while pointing toward the same underlying geometry. Now, here's something that I find quite extraordinary. And I share it not as mysticism, but as precise geometric knowledge. When a tensegrity mast is built, tensegrity icosahedrons, one of those extraordinary structures of floating compression held in a continuous web, or as Kenneth Snelson would say, a continuous sea of tension. When you look at it from one end, What you see in cross-section at any point along its length is Solomon's seal, the six-pointed star, the stellar octangular, the star tetrahedron. The same pattern that the ancient traditions encoded in sacred sites, in temple geometry, in the yantra of the heart chakra, appears in the end elevation of a structural model built by following nothing more than the honest requirements of tension and compression forces in three-dimensional space. You literally incorporate that geometry everywhere in your form. Like it or not, it already is that way. Nobody put it there deliberately. The geometry put itself there, or rather, we incorporated that geometry as we self-organised into form as any other biological creature. We can only abide by the same laws of nature, and her grammar and syntax and vocabulary are pretty consistent. It was always there. It's the natural expression of triangulated force transmission in living structures. You may not be able to explain exactly why that matters. You may just feel that it does. Now, I want to bring someone into this episode who's been waiting in the wings of this series since we began, and that's Leonardo da Vinci. We've spoken of him before in the context of this series and in earlier work. Da Vinci understood the geometry of living form with an intimacy that most anatomists of his time, and many since, have not matched. He looked at the human body and saw a specialised, moving, living kind of architecture. He didn't see the dead architecture of stacked stones and columns, but the living architecture of forces in dynamic relationships. He studied water extensively to make sense of its behaviour, and his work extended into the fascinating form of living human shape. Now, his most famous image, the one almost everyone recognises, is Vitruvian Man. You may know the story. The Roman architect Vitruvius set a challenge. He asked whether any person could draw a perfectly proportioned, i.e. in divine proportion, which has specific rules and ratios, a human figure whose outstretched hands and feet simultaneously touched the perimeters of both a circle and a square of the same area. It sounds simple, but it defeated everyone who attempted it for centuries. And the reason it defeated them is that they all made the same assumption. They placed the navel of the man at the centre of both the circle and the square simultaneously. The geometry refused to resolve. The figure could not touch all four perimeters at once. Da Vinci solved it by understanding something the others had missed. The two centres cannot be the same point. The square and the circle have different centres, and the distance between these two centres was not an error. It is, in fact, the most important measurement in the whole figure, because it resolved the challenge of Vitruvian Man. The centre of the square is at the pubic bone on the man, earth, ground, the downward pointing triangle, the ancient symbol of the feminine Mother Earth, Gaia, the matrix from which form is born. The very word geometry comes from geo, earth, and metria, measure, mater, mother. It is the measure of Mother Earth. The centre of the circle is the navel, sky, the upward pointing triangle, the ancient symbol of the masculine father sky, the heavens. The area between these two centres is the dantian, the second chakra, the creative centre of the human form. The place in the body that the ancient traditions of both East and West understood as the seat of generative force, the origin of new life. Where the heavens reach down to the earth and the earth reaches up to the heavens, the sacred geometry in which humankind is the in-between. In the star tetrahedron, the upward pointing triangle and the downward pointing triangle meet and interpenetrate at precisely this equatorial threshold, the masculine and feminine principles in geometric union. the third force arising from their meeting, the birth of the divine child. Now, in the archetypes of numbers, symbolic or sacred mathematics, 1 and 2 are not numbers necessarily. They are considered to be the parents of numbers. 3 is the sacred offspring, the firstborn. So there is a deep and sacred history in this symbolic mathematics and the development of numbers in our ancient culture and modern economics. In fact, the story of that gives rise to our ability to code and use computers. So this isn't airy-fairy storyfying. It's the missing dimension from the popular reductionist reasoning that stifles the truth of how we form as living, animated beings. It's a full story for another day or another episode, but don't imagine for a moment that this is anything other than the genius that brings AI forward. I don't refer to it as bioemotional intelligence because I'm full of esoteric nonsense. I refer to it as bioemotional intelligence because every computer you've ever used, every code in every piece of technology relies on the advent of zero, our original episode. Without it, there's no coding. When the Western world relied on Roman numerals, zero wasn't available. The advent of zero and the Arabic numerals we describe as our decimal counting system are in fact known to the Arabian trading communities who introduced them to the West as the Hindusat. We count on Vedic sages for our accounting and our counting. This mathematics is much more than the times table we learn in school and the simplistic secular mathematics of 1 and 1 is 2. It's the symbolic mathematics that Newton used when he created calculus as a language, and the sacred mathematics that Da Vinci used when he drew Vitruvian Man. Da Vinci learned the mathematical foundation of divine proportion. He did this through his collaboration with Luca Pacioli, the Italian mathematician and Franciscan friar. Together, they produced a book called Divina Proporzione, written around 1497 and published in 1509. Da Vinci contributed the geometric illustrations among the most extraordinary hand-drawn representations of three-dimensional polyhedra ever produced. Only 2 manuscript copies survive. There's one in Milan and one in Geneva. How he drew them by hand in the 15th century is frankly beyond belief when you have any sense of their complexity. It's worth saying clearly here that the mathematics behind all of this so-called sacred geometry, the zero, the decimal system, the symbolic logic that Da Vinci mastered, is the same foundation on which every computer ever built has run. That's not an esoteric statement. It's the missing history of everything we think of as modern technology. Humankind is no less sacred now than it was then. If only we remembered that as a species. In the Aramaic tradition, the Lord's Prayer opens with the word Abun, which is its original language. It carries within it the meaning of Father, Mother, and the divine creative force that arises from their union. Every child, the tradition suggests, is the living result of that union of heaven and earth, sky and ground, the circle and the square. The third force, the first offspring, literally, symbolically, and archetypally. Da Vinci drew that, not as theology or mysticism, but as geometry, as precise, measurable, demonstrable truth of the mystical shapes of sacred mathematics. Vitruvian Man is a star, the star Tetrahedron, Solomon's seal made human, the measure of Mother Earth, animated by Father Sky, giving rise to the living form between them. And this knowledge was always there waiting to be recognised again. The geometry was never lost, only temporarily overlooked. And I think we're finding our way back, because it was originally written in the language of mysticism, not religion or churchianity, but the sacred honouring of the human, which in Sanskrit means divine man, and honours that wisdom in everyone born, physically, artistically, symbolically, creatively, and with grace. Before we close, as with all the other episodes, I want to give you something to carry into your body. Return to the breath we began with. Inhale slowly, and as you do, feel the upward reach of it, the expansion, the lifting, the reaching. Imagine the breath going up through a point in your crown, up toward the sky to what we call the 12-finger point, a distance above your head that would mark where each hand on its side plus 2 fingers on top would reach. Hold there for 1 nanosecond. Sip a tiny extra breath, and now exhale and feel the return, the descent, the settling, the coming back to earth. Imagine that exhale gently pouring down your spine, all the way down through your body to the ground. Now find that still point at the top of the next inhale, that fraction of a second of pure poise, that tiny second sip of breath before the exhale begins, neither ascending nor descending, neither arriving nor departing. That is the octahedron. That is air. That is you. Suspended for one luminous moment between the upward triangle and the downward triangle, between Father Sky and Mother Earth, between the circle and the square. You do this without thinking, without trying, somewhere between 15 and 20,000 times every single day. The geometry was always already there, in you, as you. In our next and final episode of this series, we're going to meet the 5th and last of the Platonic volumes, the dodecahedron. 12 pentagonal faces, 20 vertices, 30 edges, the geometry of ether, the 5th element, the one the ancients considered almost too sacred to name, the form that Plato said the gods used for the whole, the volume that contains, nested within it, all the others. We will also meet Metatron's cube, a figure that reveals all 5 Platonic volumes simultaneously, held in a single ancient geometric diagram that's been waiting quietly for this entire series to find it. After fire, earth, water, and air, we arrive at the 5th. I will see you there.